Hello, my name is Mark Benton. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Missouri, and today I'm going to be showing some of my dissertation research. So policing has a legitimacy problem. African Americans consistently rate the police lower than other races, and we see the protests today that we see. It's in policing's best interest to improve its legitimacy. Government has an easier time operating when it's legitimate, and legitimacy with the police leads to more voluntary compliance. Today's legitimacy problems are really in line with policing's history. So some of the earliest police departments in the United States were formed to police slaves in the southern parts of the United States. Police enforced Jim Crow segregation laws. Police enforced sundown town laws. Police enforced against civil rights protesters, releasing attack dogs and arresting children. And so with that in mind, today's policing becomes part of the history of policing. And so there's this idea in political science and public affairs research of policy feedback theory, where a policy from the past can influence how people see government today. And so there appears to be some kind of effect for African Americans in the police, a policy feedback effect. Kavanaugh and Kaufman point out that parents who are unsatisfied with the police raise children who are unsatisfied with the police. Teague describes a fear and hatred of the police as one thing Black parents pass on to children. Howell Haddon and colleagues measure this, finding that African Americans rate the police more negatively with history in mind, describing it as a collective knowing that the next racial police incident is around the corner. So one way to address this would be through policy, and community policing policy is one popular suggestion. When communities and police department work together, they can do a better job fighting crime and prioritizing resources where the community wants them. However, community policing policy has not always been put into place very effectively. It's certainly more popular to talk about than do. Departments often do not give citizens a real voice in the policing process, and the resources to do community policing can be difficult to find. And so with that in mind, police decision makers might need some kind of supplement. So one potential supplement is this idea of apologia, apologizing for the racist history of policing. This sort of approach is suggested by Balfour et al. In their book, they describe this approach as being effective for historical atrocities, calling it relational expiation. And then so I point out that apologizing is typically also just a common solution to problems. Some examples of this kind of approach of apologia: there have been apologies for Japanese internment during World War II, Japanese war crimes against the Chinese during World War II, United States colonialization of Hawaii. There are several examples of apologies in policing, specifically in Wake County, North Carolina, and LaGrange, Georgia. It was one component of Barack Obama's Department of Justice 21st century policing plan. There hasn't really been an evaluation. And so this sort of approach does have drawbacks. Apologies need not have any real effect. I think everyone has received an insincere apology. I'm sorry, but I don't feel like I'm to blame, or I'm sorry you feel that way, or I'm sorry, but please don't tell anybody. And so Angelique Davis argues that apologizing for racist history in the United States may actually contribute to white supremacy, because it creates this illusion of progress without really correcting patterned inequality. So I'm going to run an experiment to see if apologia as a supplement to community policing creates additional effects. To do so, I need to construct an apology that's really aimed at reconciliation. So I looked at the communication literature, and I created this list of different apologia aspects that inform my experimental treatment. And so what happens is I give two groups a story, and then the treatment group reads this additional paragraph that's on the screen right now. And I would definitely suggest pausing to read the whole thing. And so this is just a summary of my experiment. Both groups read about racial history. Both groups read about a community policing reform in a hypothetical community of Wellsville. The treatment group gets an apology for policing's history. I did my experiment on Amazon's Mechanical Turk, which should have a sufficient base to draw from for an African-American sample. I did a demographic screener to make sure that I only sampled African-Americans, while also making sure that I got quality participants. So for my dependent variables, I gathered sort of a standard feeling thermometer. I take Tom Tyler's police support scale. This scale correlates well with legal behavior. So if this scale is higher, people are more likely to comply with the law. And then these are common questions of police legitimacy. And I can, certainly if you want to reach out, I can talk more about scale construction. I just use regular OLS as an analytical strategy. We'll see that the randomization was good, so I don't really need controls. I do run some controlled regressions, and they give me a better overall picture of what the data looks like. So these are what my dependent variables look like. We see a little bit of left skew here, but there does not appear to be a ceiling or floor effect. The randomization appeared successful. No individual characteristics really predicted selection into treatment or control. This is the feeling thermometer dependent variable, and what it sort of looks like to me is that this little bump between 20 and 40 in the comparison group became this bump between 60 and I'd say about 90 in the treatment group. And this more or less, this general shape change appears to be the same for all the variables. Perhaps a little bit less for the support variable, and perhaps a little bit more so the case for the trust in police variable. When I run my actual regressions, there's statistical significance from the treatment on the uncontrolled regression of the feeling thermometer and the trust in police variable. There is no significance in the uncontrolled regression for the support and police variable. And then when you include controls, all the variables lose statistical significance. The support variable never having statistical significance. So these results are suggestive. The bivariate, the uncontrolled regressions, had a very small effect that lost significance with control variables. There's good reason to do the uncontrolled regression because the randomization was successful. So I say that Apologia has a small effect. It appears it has a small effect. I'm not necessarily impressed. And so it makes it difficult to recommend this as a strategy for police. Experiments happen kind of in a bubble. And so this experiment certainly did examine any cost of Apologia. And historically in the United States, this kind of strategy has created costs. So Apologia has a small effect, but I wouldn't recommend it, especially when you consider it probably won't have any effect on legal compliance. And so my recommendation is, if you're going to do police reform, simply do the reform. Don't mince words. Thank you.